Fight fans, welcome to the PBC podcast, brought to you by Premier Boxing Champions with your host, Kenneth Bouhairie and Michael Rosenthal.
Welcome, everyone, to the PBC podcast. I'm Kenneth Bouhairie.
And I'm Michael Rosenthal, editor of USA Today's Boxing Junkie.
Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. Big fight week, historic fight week. Saturday night, Jermell, Charlo, and Brian Castano will throw down at AT&T Center in San Antonio to crown the first ever undisputed four-belt champion at 154 pounds. Live action begins on SHOWTIME at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Obviously, we're going to break all of that down. Plus, joining us today is undefeated interim 135-pound champion Rolando Romero. Romero, of course, will defend his title on the Charlo Castano undercard Saturday night, so we'll talk to him about that. And in today's toe-to-toe segment, we're going to unveil our top 5 154-pounders of the past 30 years. That should be fun. But first, Mike, some bad news in the boxing world. It appears the third bout between WBC heavyweight champ Tyson Fury and former champ Deontay Wilder will now take place in October, knock on wood. Instead of July 24th, Fury and members of his camp contracted COVID-19. Fury only took one shot of the Moderna vaccine. You're supposed to get 2. And so here we are, Mike. What were your thoughts when you initially heard this?
Well, I'll tell you what I wrote. I wrote that it's unfortunate, but it's not the end of the world. Stuff happens. You know, a lot of fighters have contracted COVID-19. They recover, they get back to training, and they fight. And I'm pretty sure that's what Fury's going to do. And blaming Fury doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'm going to guess that he didn't want to get COVID. I know he took, as you mentioned, I know he took one vaccine and not the other, which seems kind of foolish to me. I'll lay it out. I'm a proponent of the vaccination. It makes sense to me. But I don't believe that they're required to get vaccinated. I only tested. I think I got that right. And now reportedly he has agreed to get vaccinated, so everything should be okay. You know, in the end, it looks as if, you know, it'll be around a 2.5-month delay. You know, that's just, it's not a catastrophe. The fight will be just as big at that time.
Yeah, for sure. Now, how do you think that delay and possibly COVID affects Fury?
Well, that's a question. I doubt it's going to affect Wilder very much. Maybe he's a little bit, you know, frustrated that he has to wait, 2.5 more months, but I think he'll be fine. With Fury, it's sort of a question mark, isn't it? I mean, other guys have come back and they've looked good and they performed well, after contracting COVID. But you just, who knows how this is going to affect him, how it's going to affect his training. And I think it's got to play some level of mind games with you too. If you get COVID, like, how is this going to affect me during the fight, blah, blah, blah. So if it affects anybody, I think it's going to affect Fury, but I have a feeling everything's going to be fine. Once that opening bell rings, we're just going to have a amazing event.
Would you say for Wilder though, how could this delay possibly affect him? I mean, he's been in the gym for God knows how long, and now he's got to wait 2.5 more months.
Well, yeah, same with Fury. Yeah, it's not ideal. Obviously, it's a difficult situation, but fights get postponed. These guys are pros. There's they have people that are experienced that they work with that hopefully they'll help him, do what's necessary to adjust. And that's what he's going to have to do. The thing is, they're both in the same boat pretty much. And again, if anybody is more adversely affected, I got to think it's going to be Fury. But heck, listen, it's a lousy thing that happened. We shouldn't have to wait. It happened. Again, once that bell rings, I think everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, and I can't wait. And hopefully we hear that bell ring sometime soon. Now, in some other big news, Sunday afternoon, we witnessed the kickoff press conference for arguably the biggest fight of 2021 and definitely the biggest welterweight match since Mayweather-Pacquiao in 2015. Speaking of Pacquiao, Manny Pacquiao versus Errol Spence Jr. Saturday, August 21st on Fox Sports pay-per-view. Mike, what were your overall thoughts on the press conference?
Well, the most interesting thing was the comment about Spence being better than Floyd Mayweather.
What do you think of that?
I don't think Pacquiao necessarily believes that. In fact, I don't think he believes that. I think he was having a little fun by taking a shot at Mayweather. Notice that he described Spence as a quote-unquote aggressive fighter, and he said, quote, "I think Spence will teach Mayweather how to fight toe-to-toe."
Right.
I think it was his way of saying that he wishes Mayweather would have just stood there and traded punches with him, which obviously wouldn't have been a good strategy on Mayweather's part. Anyway, that spiced up the presser a little bit, I thought. Otherwise it was they both, expressed a lot of respect for one another, which I liked. But I think that moment was probably the most interesting moment.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I don't think he was wishing that Mayweather would go toe-to-toe with him. I thought that was his way of trying to get Spence to go.
Yeah, in other words, that's what he was doing. Yeah, he was saying that Mayweather didn't fight his fight. He needs a guy to fight aggressively. He needs a guy to come to him, a guy that he doesn't have to try to find, who's going to be there. And I think he was maybe playing a little bit of a mind game with Spence too.
And it could be that this version of Errol is better than the old version of Mayweather that he fought. I don't know, but I'm with you. I tend to think he was just taking a shot at Floyd. He
was smiling.
Yeah. We'll see what kind of fight Errol brings on August 21st. We know what man he's going to bring, and we can't wait for it. And with that, it's time to bring in our guest this week. He is one of the most outspoken and hard-hitting young fighters in the game, the undefeated WBA Interim World 135-pound champ, Rolando Romero. Rolly, first, before we get into your upcoming fight, I wanted to get your take on the Tyson Fury Deontay Wilder saga. What were your thoughts on this recent postponement?
Apparently Tyson Fury got COVID, so everyone's game postponed because of that. The same thing happened to Teofimo, So, there's no controlling. There's no control to that, It's happened a good number of times since the pandemic started, and people started throwing shows again. So it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me at all.
Are you taking any extra precautions yourself, ahead of your fight next week, or?
I have the antibodies, so I'm perfectly fine.
Nice.
Good deal. You were originally slated to face Austin Dulé, but he pulled out with a knee injury. You seemed sort of skeptical about what happened. Why is that?
Look, any person gets offered a world title shot, especially a world title shot that I don't feel he deserved, but regardless, pulls out of a world title shot for whatever reason. We saw my last fight with Sparrow. I had a knee brace on. My knee was injured. I still took the fight because, regardless, Yeah. I wanted to fight. I wanted to win. I wanted to prove myself. Even this camp, at the beginning of camp, I twisted both my ankles, not just one, both of them. And then also I was in a car accident on Sunday, and I'm still not complaining. I'm still trying to take this fight, So to me, he's just a coward. And any man that declines a world title shot is a coward.
Got it. Are you okay? Were you injured in the car accident?
I was a little sore, but it wasn't bad. Okay. It totaled the vehicle, but I'm perfectly fine.
Wow, tough guy. Okay. What's your take on your new opponent, Anthony Yigit?
I don't really know too much of him. He's an Olympian. He's 20. He has a way better record, so it's better for me, And it's just that he's an Olympian and he has a better record, so that's good,
Got it.
You've had this situation happen with your last fight too, but is it sort of risky, dangerous when you have a last minute opponent like that, and you don't know too much about him?
I fought a good number of times. I've had 35 fights in the amateurs, So we get our opponent same day,
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter, I'm happy he stepped up to take the fight, and I hope everything goes well. He makes weight properly and all that stuff, and the fight goes on.
Well, a lot of people feel he's an even tougher opponent than Austin Dulé. Would you agree with that?
I mean, he has a better record, so on paper he already looks better. I like I said, I don't really know too much about this dude, so I can't really say. But Austin Dulé, I didn't think he was anything special. I didn't think he was a horrible fighter. I didn't think he was anything special. He was, like I said, he was just there.
So how do you see the fight between you and Yigit playing out? What's the game plan for you?
Well, I mean, I'm gonna say it like this: I fought 3 southpaws. I have 6 knockdowns amongst those. All have been ended in the first round. So I guess we're gonna continue the streak.
Okay. Looking back, you defeated Jackson Marinez in a competitive fight to win your interim title. Some people disputed that decision. What do you think of when you think back on that fight?
With Marinez, I mean, every single judge had me winning the fight, So, I mean, at the end of it, what counts more? I'm going to ask you guys, what counts more, a jab or a power punch?
Power punch.
Yeah.
Power punch, correct?
Right.
What counts more, being aggressive or passive?
Aggressive, always.
Okay, what counts more, hurting your opponent or not hurting your opponent at all?
I mean, that one's pretty self-explanatory.
Right.
So I mean, like I said, that amateur shit doesn't work in the pros, and that's the reason why. That's the reason why I won that fight convincingly. Especially on judges' scorecards. I bet you, if anything, I do feel that if there was, let's say, a crowd, it would be more apparent, because what's seen on TV and seen in person is 2 completely different things.
That's okay. You obviously you look better, even better against Avery Sparrow. You showed patience, more boxing ability when you stopped him in January. What were your thoughts on your performance in that fight?
I could have got Sparrow out of there in the first round, and I decided not to. I decided to get my rounds and do what other people think I couldn't do.
Oh. So where do you feel you've made the most improvements as a fighter?
I'm always improving as a fighter. I'm always getting better. Even with Marinez, I've only ever fought 6 rounds, so and I had, like I said, I started boxing late,
Yeah.
So it was relatively unknown if I could go 12 rounds, especially throwing hard, and I kind of shut everybody up, and then, with Sparrow, so with Marinez, we worked more conditioning than anything, With Sparrow, I was like, okay, well, 12 rounds was like easy, I thought we were in round 10 when we were in round 12. That's how good I felt, it was like, my dad asked my trainer, wait, what round this is? My trainer, bullet says 12. I was like, no, it's 10.
Wow.
And I like I said, I was like, I thought I was in round 10. I was like, I thought I still had 2 more rounds.
Oh.
3 more rounds because it was in the corner,
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that you're always improving. I saw some recent pics of you, and you look like you're in fantastic condition. Did you do anything different for this camp?
I'm not sure. Hey, Crom, we do anything different this camp? Not really, no. Yeah, we didn't do anything different.
If it ain't broke, why fix it, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, if it ain't broke, why fix it?
There you go. So what's it like to spar and prepare at Mayweather Boxing Club?
I wasn't there all camp.
Oh, you weren't? Okay. Where did you, where were you trained?
Capetillo's and City Boxing.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Well, speaking of Mayweather Boxing Club anyway, you and Tank Davis have had some back and forth over the years. Can you tell us where that stems from?
I mean, he has the belt that I want. I mean, either he's going to have to vacate it or I'm going to have to take it. There's no other way around it,
Okay.
So it sounds like.
And aside from that, I just really don't like him as a person,
Why is that?
I mean, that one's pretty self-explanatory. He's a pretty piece of shit person.
Wow.
Sounds like we're building toward a collision. Does that
Bad blood?
Do I have that right?
I mean, I hope, like I said, I hope that fight can happen in the future. Hopefully in the near future. So I can get my other belt.
Got it. What were your thoughts on his fight against Mario Barrios? Did you watch it?
Yeah. He did what he was supposed to do. He looked good with Barrios. Barrios bigger dude, Barrios a much bigger dude, but Barrios I felt was too passive. He should have been more aggressive, you know, because Tank was terrified of him, especially in those opening rounds. It's just he realized Barrios was more terrified of him, you know, and that's when he pressed the action.
Wow. Now, another lightweight that your name is swirled around is Ryan Garcia. I've heard that you guys sparred in the past, but can you tell us the story of when that happened and what happened when you guys sparred?
April 20th, 2017.
Oh, what happened?
Yeah, I whooped his ass, like, really bad.
No, there's a recording of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, anyone can go on YouTube and see it. Like, it was bad, you know. It was just a breakdown and a breakdown and breakdown, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But Ryan's has improved much as a fighter, you know, since then, you know.
But you have as well, right?
Yeah, of course. Like I said, I improve every moment of every day. Whether it's physically or mentally, I still improve.
So is he someone that you're still targeting, or? I
mean, yeah, I'm always going to be targeting him. But like I said, to me, there's nothing to win from it. I want a belt. And the only other belt holders that I can fight is, you know, because he vacated his belt. So the one, or it got, I don't even know what happened, but he doesn't have the belt anymore. So it's only Tank, Teofimo, and Devin Haney.
So those are the guys you're targeting.
Yeah.
Very good. You mentioned a late start. We were curious about something. How did you first get into boxing to begin with?
My dad always wanted me to do it as a kid. My dad used to box, you know. My dad used to box in Cuba. And he always wanted me to box, you know, and like he tried to make me do it as a kid, but I didn't want to do it, you know. So I never went to a boxing gym or any of that stuff, you know. And I remember, so I did judo for 9 years, from like 8.5 to like 17. And we were watching the 2012 Olympics, and I told I was watching the judo Olympics, right? And boxing came on, and I was like, watching, right? I'm like, these guys are chumps. I told my dad, right? And my dad's like, well, he said I was a bitch. I wouldn't do it, and I was like, no, these guys are chumps. I'd beat the shit out of them. I told my dad that, and he was like, all right, you want to do it, right? I was like, yeah. So he took me to the gym next day, and I busted some dude in the face and broke his nose.
Wow.
And I was like, okay. The next day, my dad took me back. I busted some other dude's nose. When I was like, what the hell? So my dad, you know, he's like, hey, punch me in the arm. And I was like, no, I ain't going to do that shit. You're going to hit me. And he was like, no, just do it. I'm like, no, you're going to hit me. So I do it. So I punched him in the arm. He's like, what the hell? Like, he didn't realize how hard I punched. So it was like, that's genetic.
Yeah.
My dad used to punch.
Wow. So it's just natural power that you have.
Yeah, you're either born with it or you're not born with it. There's no building it. There's no creating it. Nothing.
Yeah, that's what it seems like to me too. Some guys have it, some guys don't.
Mm.
Back to the present. Assuming you beat Yigit, how quickly do you want to be moved? When do you think you'll fight for the next level title?
Sure. Hopefully, my next fight I fight him. Hopefully, my next fight I fight one of them. But I mean, like I said, the easiest one for me to make is Gervonta Davis. So that's the fight I want.
Is that something that's been discussed, or I mean, you know, you guys are both Mayweather Promotions fighters. It seems like it would be relatively easy to make.
There's no reason why it couldn't be made. We have same manager, same promoter. There's no reason why it can't be made. Same weight class, and if he wants to fight at 40, we fight at 40.
Oh,
very good. So you win this fight. That's what you want.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me. All right. Rolando, thanks so much for the time. It's really good talking to you. Best of luck in this fight. Let's get you back on after the fight to talk about what happened.
All right, sounds great.
It's time for the PBC fight of the week, and we've got a great one. Saturday night, WBA, WBC, and IBF World Super Welterweight Champion Jermell Charlo facing WBO champion Brian Castano for the undisputed 154-pound crown. It's going down at the AT&T Center in San Antonio, live on Showtime beginning at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and we'll begin here with the essentials.
Okay, here we go. Jermell Charlo is 34-1 with 18 knockouts. Castano 17-0-1 with 12 knockouts. Charlo 4-1 in his last 5 with 3 KOs. Castano 4-0-1 with 2 KOs. Last fight for Charlo was that sensational 8th round knockout over Jason Rosario last September. Castano equally dominating. Unanimous decision over Patrick Teixeira in February. Charlo 51% knockout ratio, Castano 67, which I find interesting, as I'm pretty sure that Charlo punches harder than Castano. Charlo has a lot of rounds, 234 rounds, Castano 108. They're both 31 years old, which I didn't realize till I did this. Charlo turned pro in 2007. He's been doing this for 14 years. Castano 2012. Both fight from an orthodox stance. Charlo's got an edge in height and reach. He's 5'11", 5'7.5" for Castano, 73-inch reach for Charlo, 67.5 for Castano. Charlo is from Houston, and Castano is from Buenos Aires, Argentina.
Man, you look at the amount of fights Castano had, 17 or 18, and I think automatically the assumption is that, well, he's an inexperienced fighter, but that's not necessarily the case. What can you tell us about Castano's boxing background?
Okay, so Castano's father, who had a few pro fights himself, by the way, got him and his brother into boxing when they were kids. Brian obviously had a successful amateur career. He reportedly was 181, 5-5. That's a lot of amateur fights, and that's a lot of success if that's accurate, and I think it is. And among the guys he beat was Errol Spence Jr. back in 2011. He also beat Sergey Derevyanchenko in the World Series of Boxing early last decade. So we should have known that this guy was not your ordinary fighter a while back.
Yeah, for sure. What about his overall skill set?
Well, the guy probably isn't the fastest or most athletic fighter in the world. I would say those aren't his strengths, let's put it that way, although he certainly isn't slow or plodding or anything like that. His strengths are a skill set that might be somewhat underestimated and just superhuman fitness. First, the skill set. He's been doing this for 20 years. He knows what he's doing. And as we know, he's a pressure fighter who throws a million punches every fight, but he isn't reckless. For example, Erislandy Lara landed at a low rate. He only landed 16% of his punches against Castano, which is a lot lower than most opponents of Lara, although he landed, I think, 34% of his power shots. But still, he's got some defensive skills. That tells me there's a method to his madness. And second, there's that fitness level. He's just relentless. You better do something to slow him down or he's going to outwork you.
Yeah, for sure. Now, let's turn to Jermell Charlo.
Okay.
Mentioned he turned pro back in 2007, which is just crazy when you think about it. What else can you tell us about his boxing background?
Well, Jermell and Jermall followed a similar path to Castano. Their father, Kevin, took them to the gym at around, I think they were around 9 or 10, and they basically haven't left the gym since then. Jermell reportedly was 56-8 as an amateur, so he also had a good foundation when he turned pro, but he's had a long pro career. I didn't even realize that it was that long until I did this. He's been at it for a long time, so he's got that foundation. He's also got a ton of pro experience that he takes into the ring.
And what about Mel's style in the ring?
I see Jermell as a complete boxer puncher, emphasis on the puncher. I also didn't realize this, but 6 of his last 7 victories have come by knockout, which is a little bit unusual in one sense. Usually when a fighter steps up his opposition, his knockout ratio kind of goes down. In Jermell's case, it's gone the opposite direction. So that tells me he's just really on top of his game in terms of his power. But I think overall, if I have a criticism, this isn't really a criticism, it's kind of an observation of Jermell. It might be that he relies too much on his power. He doesn't seem to mind falling behind on the cards because he knows how things are going to end. Except one time against Tony Harrison, the knockout didn't come and he lost the fight on the cards. I would think that he'd want to be busier earlier in fights to avoid that situation. But again, I'm nitpicking a little bit. I think this guy is one of the very best in the business. I love his determination. I love his intensity, and that power is special.
Yeah, and you mentioned determination, which I think is a key attribute for both guys. Style-wise, how do you expect this fight to play out?
Well, I'm pretty sure that Castano is going to do what he does, which is to pressure Charlo from beginning to end. Charlo is going to have to give him a reason not to stalk him, which means he's going to have to give Castano a taste of his power. That can slow down a pressure fighter for obvious reasons. Charlo could also box and move if he wanted to. Maybe he'll do some of that, but I think Charlo's power could end up being the difference in this fight.
Do you think Castano's being overlooked? I mean, Charlo is a pretty sizable favorite here. I think most pundits are picking him to win, and probably rightfully so, given his background. But what chance do you give Castano, and is he perhaps being underestimated or underrated by aficionados?
I think if people who follow boxing have their eyes open, they're not going to overlook Castano. I think Charlo has garnered a lot of respect in the business, but people also know that Castano is the real deal. You don't beat a guy like Michel Soro or draw with Erislandy Lara and beat Patrick Teixeira so convincingly unless you have something going on. I think he deserves to be the underdog too. There's no question. Charlo is one of the hottest guys in the sport. He's basically looked unbeatable in his last several fights. At the same time, I think people know that Castano is going to push Charlo like few, if any, guys have in the past.
Sure, it's going to be a great fight. And if Charlo wins such a huge victory, what would a win mean for him?
Well, you know how I feel about alphabet titles, but to become undisputed champion in any division is something that's special, especially being that it's it would be the first time that anybody's held all 4 titles in this era in that division. I think it would add considerably to his star power, which translates to a level of fame and fortune he hasn't experienced yet. He'd rise even higher on pound for pound lists. And I just think it would make him a major player at 160 whenever he decides to move up to that weight.
Yeah, for sure. And with that in mind, who are you picking?
Well, I want to be clear about something first before I make my prediction. Charlo had better be 100% ready, 100% focused for this fight. All boxes had better be checked because this guy, Castano, doesn't fool around. You know he's going to be ready. He comes at you relentlessly with bad intentions, which could make your life miserable, even if you have your hand raised. Now, all that said, I think Charlo is a level above Castano, maybe not a huge level, but a level above Castano. I think he's better across the board. The only exception, and it could be a big one, being activity. I see Charlo slowly but surely breaking Castano down and either scoring a late knockout or winning a close but clear decision.
Yeah, I think that, like you, I agree. I think it's an extremely dangerous fight for Charlo. Castano can be hit and hurt early on in fights, and I think that that's what Jermell may have to do, and he's got the power to do it and the skill. So I'm going with Charlo by 5th round TKO, not because Castano is a pushover. Quite the contrary. I think that if Jermell is unable to get him out of there early on, that he could be in for a long night. But I do think he has the power to do that, and I have to think that that's going to be, he's going to want to take Castano out of there and save himself 12 rounds of trouble. So that's my pick, and I'm sticking to it. Luckily, I hold a sizable lead in our prediction league. 22 wins, 3 losses, 2 draws. Mike, 20 wins, 5 losses, 2 draws. So we'll see what happens. That won't change this week. Now, just a reminder, guys, a couple other bouts on the card. Obviously, we spoke about Rolando Romero taking on Anthony Yigit, 12 rounds for Romero's interim WBA 135-pound belt. And then a very intriguing middleweight matchup between hot prospect Amilcar Vidal against veteran Emmanuel Alim. So lots to look forward to on Saturday night.
Champions collide.
That powerful left hook.
Jermell Charlo bringing his 3 titles to the ring.
The young lion roaring tonight.
Brian Castano putting his championship belt on the line.
He has to rise to the occasion.
Who will become the undisputed champion of the world?
The best fighting the best.
History will be made. Jermell Charlo versus Brian Castano for the undisputed welterweight world title. Live on Showtime.
All right, it's time for Mike and I to go toe to toe. And this week we are going to name our top 5 154 pounders of the past 30 years. Naturally, we're going to go in ascending order. Mike, let's start with your number 5.
Okay, as usual, I want to preface this really quick. You know what I find when we do these lists is that after we do it, when I hear what you have to say, when I discuss it, I end up thinking I got it wrong, at least to a small extent. You know, like, oh, wait a second, I should have put that guy there, or I shouldn't have left this guy out. So, for me, this is kind of just like a process. It's like a learning process. In other words, when we're finished doing it, I'm much more clear on what exactly the list should be. But I did my best to come up with the 5 guys that I thought were the best. So let's. I'll start with my number 5, Winky Wright. He didn't have the strength of resume as some guys. At 154 pounds the last 30 years. His back-to-back victories over Shane Mosley stand out to me. But I got to see him up close a number of times, and this guy was truly special. He was almost impossible to beat in his prime because he was such a good technician and he was really durable. He had a few setbacks at 54, but they all had asterisks, including a close loss to a prime Fernando Vargas. I was at that fight. A lot of people thought Wright got screwed in that fight because Vargas was the star of the show. I barely even knew who Winky Wright was going into that fight, but it didn't take me long to get to know who he was. Anyway, he held a title, 154 title for 8 years over a 10-year period in the 1990s and 2000. And he's a Hall of Famer for a reason. He's one of the best, honestly, he's one of the best boxers I've ever seen.
Yeah, he's an excellent boxer, and that's why he's my number 5 as well.
Oh, man. We didn't talk. We didn't talk beforehand.
Right. And I don't think we're going to have a similar top 5 either. Well, we'll see. But he is my number 5. A lot of great wins. Couple defeats that stand out. The 1-2 Fernando Vargas, obviously very, very close fight. I did think Vargas nicked that one just because he finished so strong in the couple rounds. And also the loss to Julio Cesar Vasquez, where he got dropped 5 times. Stands out as well, but the win over Felix Trinidad. I mean, you could go down the list as far as
that was a middleweight.
Winky Wright, Andrew Council, Bronco McCart. I thought he beat Jermaine Taylor when they fought as well. So that was an impressive victory, in my opinion. Just an excellent fighter. I mean, period. What can you say about the Wingster? Something interesting about him that Ike Corte told me was Corte wasn't complaining because I believe he and Wright are good friends, but he said that Winky stole his fighting style. He said, apparently they both fought out of France earlier on in their careers. That's fascinating. And he said Winky mimicked the high guard, come behind the jab style that was Corte's calling card. That said, Winky had the better career, as much as I love.
Ike was good.
Yeah, Ike was a great fighter. Yeah. Let's go to number 4. I will kick this one off. My number 4 is someone we have been talking about throughout the show, and that is none other than Iron Man, Jermell Charlo. Speaking of underrated resumes, the run that Charlo had as a prospect is just astounding. I mean, as a prospect, you look at the guys he beat. Francisco Santana, this was a solid fighter. 5-10 years later, Jermell Charlo beat him 10 years ago. Gabe Rosado, Jermell Charlo beat him. What was it? When did he beat Gabe Rosado? 2013, 2014? Goodness, that was 7 years ago he beat Gabe Rosado. Harry Joe Yorgi. The list goes on. Vanes Martirosyan, Joaquim Alcine, John Jackson, Erickson Lubin, Tony Harrison, Austin Trout, Jason Rosario. So a longtime champion, and he gets my vote for number 4, Mike.
Okay, so I swear we didn't talk before this.
Wait a second.
We didn't even say anything about order. My number 4 is Jermell Charlo.
Wow.
I always hesitate to go with active guys in this kind of list, but we can't ignore what he's done at 54. You just went over, the list. A guy like Vanes Martirosyan, I don't think people realize how good of a boxer he was, and Charlo took care of him. Erickson Lubin, Austin Trout. He did lose the fight to Tony Harrison, but he came back and he won the rematch. He stopped him in the rematch. Excellent performance. And he's coming off that sensational knockout of Jason Rosario. That's, like you said, that's an impressive run. Let's put it this way: if somebody wants to argue he isn't among the top 5 at this moment, he certainly will be if he beats Castano.
Well, I was just wondering to myself, if he does beat Castano become the undisputed champ, how high does he go on this list? But we'll save that for another conversation since we're not done with this list. Let's go 3. Who do you have for
We'll see if
3?
we have this. We'll see if we have the same 3. I kind of doubt it, but maybe. So my number 3 is, and you know what? And this is one of those things where maybe he should be number 2. Canelo Alvarez. He had a. Sorry.
Interesting.
Yeah, he had a dominating run at 54. He beat Kermit Cintron, Shane Mosley, Josecito Lopez, Austin Trout, Alfredo Angulo, and Erislan de Lara, when a lot of people thought he shouldn't even have fought him. He fought him and he beat him, although some people think it was a little bit of a gift. I think I had Alvarez winning that fight. Also beat Miguel Cotto, but at 155-pound catch weight, so that was sort of a junior middleweight fight. Canelo's only blemish was the one-sided loss to Mayweather, but obviously there's no shame in that. Nobody has ever beaten Floyd Mayweather. This is a weight at which Canelo began to demonstrate that he's one of the best of his generation. I just thought he had to be on this list.
And my number 3 is Canelo Alvarez. So I'm seeing a pattern here that's not stopping. You pretty much outlined every reason why Canelo should be number 3. Had a great reign at 154, beat a lot of top names there. And I'll include the Cotto victory as well, although I do believe it was at a catch weight. So we might as well go on to number 2. Who do you have?
Okay, number 2, and I want to qualify this by saying he's one of my all-time favorite fighters. So maybe I'm a little bit biased, but he deserves it. He was an incredible fighter. Terry Norris. One thing I like about Norris, for the purposes of this exercise, is that he was essentially a junior middleweight his entire career, which is very, very unusual. He was just a terrific fighter. He could box, he could punch, he was fast, he was a fantastic athlete. Apparently, he was a really, really good baseball player growing up. He had one perceived weakness, his chin, but he was stopped by murderous puncher Julian Jackson. No shame in that, and he avenged a knockout loss to Simon Brown by easily outpointing him in their rematch. In total, he was a 154-pound champ and held at least one title almost continuously from 1990 to 1997, which is 8 years. He was rewarded by being elected to the Hall of Fame. And again, he's one of my all-time favorites. Great fighter.
Yeah, absolutely. And your number 2 was a longtime champion at 154 pounds. My number 2 was the exact opposite of that. Floyd Money Mayweather. Very few fights at 154. I count only 3, as I don't count the win over Conor McGregor. But those 3 wins are remarkable. Oscar De La Hoya, Miguel Cotto, and Saul Canelo Alvarez. I think he's got a strong case for number 1 here, but the lack of longevity drops him to number 2 for me, Mike.
Yeah. Okay. I hear you.
Well, I kind of see where you're going with this. So who's your number 1?
So my number 1 is Floyd Mayweather. As you said, he didn't really campaign much at 54. And as you also said, but 3 of the 4 guys that he beat at the weight were current or future Hall of Famers. De La Hoya, Cotto, Canelo Alvarez also beat Conor McGregor at junior middleweight. If you ask me who was the most accomplished fighter at 154 pounds over the past 30 years, I probably wouldn't say Mayweather. But if you ask me who was the best 154 pounder over the last 30 years, which is what we're doing here, I think, I would say that it's Floyd Mayweather.
I can't argue with that because those wins really are remarkable. But my number 1 is terrible Terry Norris. Now, you outlined most of the reasons why he could be number 1. He was number 2 on your list. And it's not like he had terrible wins. I mean, Donald Curry, Vincent Petway, you mentioned Simon Brown, Meldrick Taylor, of course, the win over Ray Leonard. Obviously, Leonard was well past his prime. But Norris made 16 defenses in total of his 154-pound titles. I mean, that is super duper impressive. And not to mention, just watching him fight in the ring, he was incredible. He could move, he could jab, he had speed, he had power, combination punching. I mean, really the only flaw he had was his whiskers were a little, he could be a little chinny at times, but he faced some big hitters in the 154-pound division. And so maybe his chin wasn't as bad as we'd like to think, but he had an incredible run during his time. Do you think that I mean, what would Jermell Charlo have to do to get to the top slot on this list? Is it even possible?
Well, let's assume for a second, just for the sake of this discussion, that he beats Castano. Maybe he moves up a place or two. I'm not sure he's going to be at the weight long enough to do it, honestly. Although, you know what? When you look back on a guy's career years later, sometimes you have a different perspective.
Sure.
He might have to stay a little bit longer. I'm not sure he's going to. Let's see what happens against Castano. If he scores a dramatic knockout, I don't know, maybe fights once or twice more at 54. I don't know if he will. Yeah, he could go to the top, but it's tough to be better than Mayweather was in those few fights. And Terry Norris, one of the things about Norris is when I look back on all the fights, I've seen hundreds, maybe thousands of fights, my career covering boxing. I'm gonna really appreciate the great fighters that I saw, but I sort of cherish the fighters that I just love to watch fight. I just love to watch Terry Norris fight. All week I would think about his fight that was coming up, and I would just get so excited, kind of like a little bit like Manny Pacquiao, that kind of thing. So I really cherish Terry Norris, and happy to see him here.
And interestingly enough, the fighter that Jermell Charlo reminds me of the most, particularly when he was younger, because he moved a lot more when he was younger, is Terry Norris. I mean, the similarities were striking. I mean, even down to their hairstyles at a certain point in time. And Norris is also from Texas.
He is indeed.
Born in Lubbock, so it all makes sense. So Charlo is the new school Terry Norris, if you will. And speaking of that, we want to remind you guys as we close out today's show that Saturday night, again, it's going down. The first ever 154-pound undisputed champion will be crowned as Jermell Charlo takes on Brian Castano live on Showtime at 9 p.m. Eastern time. You don't want to miss that. We're going to have plenty to talk about next week. So thank you guys for tuning in, and be sure to check back again on the PBC podcast.